And now, a warm welcome to the legendary Michael Curtiz. Curtiz is perhaps best known for directing Casablanca, though he was much more than even that. He was first a silent era visionary, then one of the early legendary directors of Hollywood during the 1930s, ending his career during the early 1960s with one of the most prolific and versatile filmographies amongst Hollywood directors, and few directors worldwide could match his specific multi-genre success. Curtiz crafted successful swashbucklers, romances, musicals, westerns, historical epics, and comedies. Now when I say successful, I specifically refer to them being smash hits with audiences. One could find a degree of inconsistency amongst Curtiz's work. One could love a romance like Casablanca or Elizabeth in Essex, yet feel bored by the swashbucklers like Captain Blood or the Seahawk, somehow. Alternatively, one might love a war epic like Charge of the Light Brigade or Captains of the Clouds, yet groan at musicals such as Yankee Doodle Dandy or White Christmas. I happen to be guilty of that one personally. But how magnificent that Curtiz could compose an experience for any mode of audience. Curtiz began working in Hollywood in 1926. Before that, he had established himself as one of the most legendary film directors in Hungary. He directed that nation's first feature film, with 1912's Today and Tomorrow. In 1919, he moved to Vienna, continuing to hone his craft. His move to Hollywood was engineered by the Warner Brothers themselves. The hiring of Curtiz proved a good financial decision on the Warner's part. Putting aside the successes of films like Tenderloin and Noah's Ark, Curtiz put out on average 3 feature films a year from 1926 to 1931. And so in 1932, the Warners, seeking to experiment with the horror genre, perhaps given Universal's success, were confident in handing the reins of Dr. X over to Michael Curtiz. I should say, not just an experiment in genre, but in photography. Dr. X was among a few Warner Brothers productions in 1931 and 1932 that sought to utilize Technicolor as an audience snare during the early years of the Great Depression. Technicolor Process Free was introduced in 1928 and improved in 1931 so that it removed grain from the Technicolor, resulting in even more vivid, vibrant colors. Much like the earlier Process 2, Technicolor Process Free entailed simultaneously photographing 2 consecutive frames of a black and white film behind red and green filters. Unlike Process 2, however, it relied on dye imbibition rather than subtractive colors. This is to say, upon processing in the lab, rather than 2 images step-printed onto 2 positives, the 2 images were printed on one side of the positive by the dye transfer process. To briefly summarize the dye transfer process, the gelatine within the film was hardened with a tanning developer, and the soft portions were washed away. These wash-off gelatin film reliefs were then dyed with the complementary hues in green, blue, and red-orange. The dyes were transferred by contact onto a blank film, which was specially prepared to absorb the color and to prevent it from bleeding, if you will. It allowed for the transferring of dyes from both color matrices into a single one-sided print, thus eliminating the complication of attaching 2 prints back to back. So now that our brief history of Curtiz and Technicolor is out of the way, let us discuss the relevant feature film, 1932's Dr. X. The plot synopsis follows Lee Taylor, a reporter investigating a series of murders that have taken place in New York City. The murders take place at night under the presence of the full moon, and each body has been strangely cannibalized after the murder. Police note that the scalpel used for these murders is a specialized tool found exclusively at one Dr. Xavier's medical academy. Dr. Xavier himself is given 48 hours to uncover the murderer, otherwise they will take him into custody. As assistants, he becomes aware of who the other suspects in this case are, people who have frequented his academy. Their names are Wells, Haynes, Duke, and Rawitz. At Dr. Xavier's estate, all of the suspects gather for an unorthodox experiment. Each member is connected to an electrical system that records their heart rate. When a reenactment of the murder of a cleaning woman appears before them, the detector will allegedly expose the guilty man. Taylor is able to sneak into the proceedings after building a rapport with Dr. Xavier's daughter, Joanne. This film balances 2 tonally different plot lines. One stars Lee Taylor as a smarmy reporter looking for a story and love if he can win her over. It captures the tone of a romantic adventure yarn, a likeable young male sprinkling light comedy over the otherwise serious narrative, not unlike 1925's The Lost World or even Cabinet of Dr. Caligari's protagonist Francis. Well, for the majority of the film, of course. We won't get into that. The other involves Dr. Xavier wandering about outstanding elaborate sets, be it the intricate organized laboratory or the grandiose decorated manor. Dr. Xavier's murder mystery is more reminiscent of a grim tone belonging to Fritz Lang's original Mabuse or Marcel Leherbier's The Inhuman Woman. One of the final baths, Dr. X is one of the final baths in Pre-Code Freedom, illuminating the morbid and obscene. Balanced together, these two tones end with a firm push in the direction of grimness before some charming final moments. Dr. X is a beautiful example of the relatable adventure investigation narrative infused with the illustration of a harsh, terrifying, cruel universe, abundant in pathos, illness, and wickedness. It really does feel downstream from the silent era in this respect. It gorges on experimentation with the depiction of sinister malice of cinematic horrorcraft, but it is fundamentally proud to be a people pleaser. What else do we expect of Michael Curtiz, surely? But yes, I love this film. One of my favourites from Curtiz, and one of my favourite horror pictures of the 1930s. Hell, this is one of my favourite Hollywood films of that decade overall. The sets, the technicolor, its unsettling tone, and generally stellar staging make for a spellbinding, exciting experience. This one comes with a high recommendation. It shouldn't be hard to access, though go for the technicolor version if you can. Michael Curtiz tantalizes us with this tale of the terrifying Dr. X.